Welcome to Heroes First Podcast, sponsored by Fund the First, the nation's leading verified crowdfunding platform for first responders, military, and medical professionals. And now, your host, broadcasting from Long Island, New York, Robert Garland.
Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining this week's episode of Heroes First Podcast. Each week, you will hear from a new guest that portrays excellence in the first responder, military, or medical professional field. If you are an active or retired member of service, or even a family member or a friend, then this show is for you. I would like to now present you with our guest for episode 10 of this podcast series, Chris Hoyer. Chris, pleasure to have you.
Thank you for the invite. I much appreciate it. Thank you.
This is great. I know the first time that we meant to link up on the show, I screwed up. It was my fault, but I'm happy that we're back here and we're doing this again.
Absolutely. Me too. I couldn't be happier, man. I think it was actually more my fault, but that's okay. Well,
I'll take the blame. It's okay. It's okay. So Chris, tell me, I'm looking at your career and everything you've done. Especially with the police department. You have a book out right now. We'll get into the book in a moment. But tell me about your police career. How much time you were in Phoenix PD? And I see Phoenix, that's the police department that's all over social media, right?
They're pretty popular. Yeah, they get a lot of attention. I should say that. So they do. Since I'm no longer there, I don't say we. They do lead the nation typically every year in officer-involved shootings, which no surprise based on where geographically they're located. It's kind of a hub for a lot of other major issues going on there. So that's why it's usually so high. So,
right. So how much time did you spend in Phoenix PD?
I was there from 97 to 2018. I did exactly 20 years and 64 days. So
good for you.
And I was counting. So.
Good for you. So while your time in the job, tell me about your career. Where'd you start? Where'd you finish?
Well, I started on patrol like we all do. And about a year on, I discovered a squad called the Neighborhood Enforcement Team, or the NET team. And basically what they do is they're kind of like a half undercover, half patrol, half catch-all squad, plain clothes. And they get a little bit more training and a lot less being tied to the radio, if you will. And it's really mostly just about chasing bad guys, which was pretty much why I got into the field to begin with. So I was at the time in 2002 when I got on that unit. It was pretty unheard of to get on with under 10 years on. And I got on with 4.5 years on, which opened the door for a lot of other younger guys to get on there as well, which is pretty cool. But so I got there in 2002 and I stayed there my entire time. I tested for other couple of details, but I stayed there because it was just awesome. I mean, I got to do everything I wanted to do, extra training and all kinds of really fun stuff. So.
No, that's great. It's always a fun time when you're on the field and you're really enforcing and you're making a difference in the community and you're having fun at the same time. Because if you're miserable out there, your career's going to be miserable.
Yeah, and it was, I mean, to be honest with you, it was great for the first 18 years of my career, and then after that, it kind of fell apart. But I was having a ball. I mean, I really was. Some days I was in jeans and t-shirts. Some days I was in a marked patrol car. Some days I was, doing not deep undercover. I never got into that, but enough close tied undercover stuff that was, put some pretty good stuff on my resume. That was pretty cool. So,
very good. Please don't tell me you wore jerseys. Did you wear a jersey?
Oh, no.
For some reason, I spent the majority of my career in narcotics, and I'm at 13 years now. But for some reason, I did it myself too. When we all got into a plainclothes unit before narcotics, we went into it was called anti-crime, and it's basically something like what you did. Everyone did the cargo shorts and jerseys.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And running shoes, of course.
Yeah, I don't know why.
It's so funny because you can pick those guys up. It's so obvious.
Oh my God. And they would point us out in a heartbeat. Yeah, there's the cops. There they are. Especially our vests would be underneath their shirts. We'd be all jacked up, So, but then it wasn't until when I got to narcotics that I learned how to dress. We dress a totally different way. And, we knew how to blend in. And I'm sure you knew going through that, doing all that stuff. So when you say undercover work, undercover is always, it's a broad spectrum, right? It's very broad, and there's all different types of things that you could do as an undercover. For instance, in narcotics, my time, when you're considered an undercover, you're someone that's actually buying drugs
Oh,
and
yeah.
they're off the map. What would you call an undercover in your unit that you were in?
Well, mostly because what we did a lot of follow up for a lot of other details, a lot of other detective um, entities and these kinds of things. So it was oftentimes when we'd run into somebody that was known for selling guns or selling stolen property, stuff like this. So, and then I was afforded the opportunity because of our lack of manpower issues because patrol's tied to the radio, so they're very mandated to the radio, of course. So they don't get a lot of time to go play, but we get all the time to play. So I had a lot of chances to go do stuff with our drug enforcement guys. So I did a lot of stuff with them, which is really cool. Did a whole bunch of Vice stuff, which I really did not enjoy one bit.
How come?
Going, it's technically really not undercover, but it is picking up prostitutes. It's just nasty. I mean, it's just nasty. I mean, I couldn't stand it. You know, girls get in the car and, you know, first thing to do is start pulling up their shirt, you know, to make sure, you know, they start grabbing you and undoing your pants. And it's like, man, I didn't get into this for that,
Yeah.
man. It was, it kind of grossed me out. So, but some guys are into it. And God bless them. So,
Nah, yeah, we had a we
but,
our
so
narcotics.
there's a
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was gonna say there's a vast array of different venues that I got involved with. Sometimes it was just pretty much on the surface, just street level stuff. Sometimes it was doing storefronts, things like this, you know. So it was pretty much unlimited. So
It's great. It's a fun experience when you're in plain clothes. You know, you know you're kind of off the radar, but you're on the radar,
yep,
right?
oh, yeah.
You know. But I was gonna say, our narcotics, we have a Vice that works hand in hand, and I spent a couple of times at Vice, and it's very different.
Oh,
Very
yeah.
different. Doing a couple of cases, we had a bad one. I remember actually, it was my second time ever going out with Vice, and one of the undercovers, he bought. So a buy would basically be buying a prostitute,
Mhm.
and when he was waiting in a room, there was a guy hiding in the closet. Hiding in the closet, jumps out with a firearm.
Oh, yeah.
He's the only means of communication that he has is called a Kel, but it doesn't. Those things never work. Texting us like, let's go, let's go, let's go. And it's like, oh shit, I gotta
Yep.
get in there, but it's
Yeah.
you don't expect that to happen during a Vice kind of buy, but those things
Typically,
happen.
no. Yeah, those are usually supposed to be pretty low key, and most of the time they are. But I've had situations where, you know, my buddies, I'm driving, and they don't want to pull me over right away, so I'm driving around the block for 15 minutes trying to come up with a story, you know, and I'm like, will you guys just pull me over so we can get this over with?
Yeah.
I'm gonna tell you. So
It's a fun time. So I'm sure you're part of thousands of arrests, a huge career.
oh yeah,
And your biggest focus though, you have children, right?
yep, oh yeah,
It's always coming home to the kids, right? Always coming home.
absolutely. You know, it was tough because I referred to it in my book a couple times about making that call. I made that call about 6 times that I was in trouble. And we're not talking about in trouble with the brass. You know, it was one of those things where I've just been involved in a shooting, or I'm in the hospital, or we lost an officer or something like that. And those calls are very hard to make. And not only, I'm sure, just is more difficult to receive as well, you know. So
No, I'm sure. I'm sure. Would you be willing to talk about one of those situations?
absolutely. Oh yeah, of course. Oh, let me dig here. So I remember I was actually training for a SWAT team one time and trying to get big, which just wasn't going to work. I was trying. I was taking all these supplements and stuff. And long story short, I ended up overdoing it. I wasn't drinking enough water. I got severely dehydrated, and called my now ex-wife. She was a wife at the time, and I was on my way down to the hospital because what ended up happening was I ended up creating a fluid sac around my heart.
Oh my
And
goodness.
fire, you know, God bless them, they didn't want to tell me what it was, and I'm kind of freaking out when they finally told me. When I got down to the hospital, basically all I needed was and a couple of IVs, and I was back to 100%. But that call on the way down there, not knowing, and when you're in, you know, you're sitting in the briefing room, and next thing you know, fire is cutting off your clothes and sticking you on a gurney. Those are some scary times. I'm like, oh, I'm not digging this too much. And my, you know, again, my ex, at the time worked very close to where the hospital was. So when I called her, I'm like, hey, just so you know, I'm being transported. And she starts bawling on the phone, like, oh my God, what's going on? And I didn't have any information for her. And so that was one of, like I said, about 6 of those kinds of calls that I had to make. The other ones were as dramatic or even more dramatic, especially during the shootings. So,
Wow.
but I get a feeling we're gonna probably cover those a little bit too. So,
Yeah, I mean, listen, I know you have this book, and actually, it's great that you're able to put all of your stories into a book and talk about the life that you went through, mentally, physically, emotionally. It's really incredible. And you put this book together when that day comes. I'm going to share the screen right now because I want any of our viewers and listeners to be able to see this. It's on Amazon, and you can purchase it if you want for $13, the paperback, or I believe it's free for the Kindle, which is great if you have that. So here it is. This is Chris Hoyer's book, When That Day Comes. And Chris, why don't you tell us basically about the main focus of the book?
absolutely. Well, it started on May 18th, 2016, and I had no idea it was going to be a thing at all ever. Um, the epicenter of the book was based on David Glasser, an officer that was killed during an ambush, and that whole thing, it should never have happened the way that it did, of course, and that's always the way these things are with when officers get killed in line of duty. And I had so many different struggles with this one because I was the first one on the scene, and it was my first actual gunfight, but my 4th shooting, and it was my 2nd shooting with a rifle. And the whole thing, I mean, of course, we show up on the scene, we do everything we can do. We've got all the resources either en route or at least notified, and it was pretty much we're on our own to handle this call. And it basically came out as a burglary, and we showed up. The guy basically shot and killed David, fired 3 rounds. My first volley of rounds with my rifle from about 35 yards out. And you would think that after you dump, 10 rounds of rifle into a guy, that's probably going to do the job. Well, that didn't do the job. And he was able to fire 3 rounds back at me, which is the beginning of the onset of the survivor's guilt. It's like, well, Dave got shot twice out of 3, and I got shot, 0 out of 3. And he obviously didn't survive, and I did. So that was where the story started. And I woke up one morning. This was probably about a year later, give or take, 2017. And this as well as I do. All the senior guys always tell you, when you start, write a story every day of something that you did, because in 20 years you're going to have a great book, which nobody ever does, including myself. So that particular morning, I woke up and I got on a laptop and I started just writing. It was absolutely unbelievable. Next thing you know, I've got something like 700 pages of work. And my girlfriend, God bless her, she actually did all the editing for me and whittled it down and made it just perfect, especially for cops. Because, I can say this because I did it for 20 years. We're not that bright, so we don't read that well. So she spaced it out the right way, made it very pretty in the whole 9 yards. And when it was all said and done, I couldn't believe it. I mean, when I got it delivered for the first time and I had it in my hands, it was actually something I couldn't, it was something I just couldn't put down. In fact, I still kind of carried it around. She gives me grief about it because I carried it around like a little security blanket. Everywhere we go, I'm handing it off to guys because I want people to know not only the story of David, because he obviously gave up his life for his community and his friends, which is incredibly heroic, but also the traumas that I experienced, from the survivor's guilt to the being the victim and almost dying and having to kill what ended up being my 3rd bad guy, and it was just a vast array of emotions. And not even talking about a year later when we all go to Washington, D.C. for Police Week as a host agency, which is not something anybody ever wants to do. And that whole thing, that whole week out there in D.C. was just a whole nother long list of emotions as well. So I'm much more articulate in the book than I am speaking live about it most of the time. But it's pretty compelling. And what I'm being told is from a lot of my friends that don't read, they've been reading it in like 2 or 3 days. I've had a couple of people that say I've sat down and read it in one sitting without even stopping, which is just a huge honor for me for people to say that, So,
No,
that's pretty much in a nutshell.
that's incredible, Chris. I think I'm definitely going to read it.
Yeah,
I'm not a big book reader. I like to listen to things. So I want to see if someone could read it back to me.
yeah. I am working on the audio version. I've got a
Yeah.
kid out in Oklahoma actually working on it for me. So hopefully
Oh, very
someday,
cool.
yeah, it'll be done. So
So, you brought up a funny point, and it's actually a funny point, but at the same thing, it's a great point that at the beginning of your career, you started writing down stories. So I'm going to tell you something. When I started my career, in Midtown South, and then I went to Midtown North and in Manhattan. And I brought around a laptop at all times, and I was writing down stories of everything that was happening every single day.
that's great.
And my wife was making fun of me. And I'll never forget this kid, Rob Haynes. And Rob is now a delegate in Midtown North. But this is over 12 years ago. Made fun of me like crazy for this book because I wanted to document all of my stories and everything. But because he made fun of me so much, I just kind of like said, I give up on this. I'm not even going to do it anymore. So, but I wish that I could do it because the stories that we have, it's so hard to remember all of them.
It's funny you say that because I remember in the academy they tell us that and they say you're going to forget. I'm like, there's no way I'm going to forget this stuff. Guess what? Yeah, I can't remember half of the stuff, And fortunately, as I was writing, all these things started coming back. I'm like, oh, I got to write that, and I couldn't write fast enough to think about everything. It was like everything was going so fast, and I was making little side notes, making sure I didn't forget this, and it was quite a journey. It really was. So.
No, it's the stuff that we experience.
And not only that,
yeah. Go ahead.
I was going to say it was hugely healing as well. I mean, I don't really ever use the word closure because I don't think, especially something like that you go through, it's never going to go away. But I did, writing the book was a huge part of my healing and kind of got me at least in the right direction back to being somewhat normal as much as that as possible. But so.
That's great. Tell me more about that. I think our listeners would like to learn about that, the healing process and how writing about your stories really helped you emotionally and mentally.
Yeah, well, here's the problem that I faced, like so many of us do. I went 18 years and never really considered things were going bad for me. And I also quit. It's a pretty hot topic right now. Not using that statement. This is what we signed up for. Because I didn't sign up to watch, people getting killed in car accidents and pulling babies out of pools and this stuff. And over time, of course, it wears on you. And if you don't process through those things, which now we're starting to get much more into that, it's a little bit simpler to try to figure things out as you go along. So the beginning of 2016 for me started with me watching an 8-year-old hang himself right in front of me. And that was traumatic. In fact, that particular day I drove back to my precinct and I went to go find my truck at a precinct I hadn't worked at in a year. And that's when I started realizing something was going wrong. And then fast forward, the same day that I did this really major investigation, which is a whole nother long story, 2 of my really good buddies got into a really nasty gunfight, which I wasn't there to help them with that whole thing. And then a couple months later after that, Dave was killed. So I was pretty much already up to here. And then when Dave was killed, it really just knocked me right on my ass. I mean, knocked me right over. And I did, of course, after the shooting, I go through the city shrink ×2. We go once for the initial and the second time to go back to make sure we're still good to go and all the answers are consistent, if you will. And so I'm able to go back on the street, which I ended up taking about 7 weeks off. And when I got back on the street, I realized that I still wasn't okay. All right. I started having all these triggers and all these flashbacks and this kind of stuff. That's a huge thing. So I just decided on my own to go back and seek more professional help, which I did. So on the city's dime, luckily, as it turns out, I went and I got a professional who only dealt with first responders and military folks. And she got me again going in the right direction. And as great as all that was, it still wasn't enough. So I got I got pulled because I made a reference to hiding one day. I said, I'm going to go find a place to hide. And based on my career, that was anything but what I was used to. You know, I was always that guy, you know, first one out the door, finding shit as quickly as I could, getting in everything I could find. And so when our EAU folks heard me say that, literally, that was one of those guys that heard me say that. Within about 2 weeks, I got pulled from the street and I got sent to the rifle range, where I was already a rifle instructor. So I was doing a lot of instructing up there. And I was up there for about 7 months. And during that time, that was when I spent a lot of time realizing that, you know, my story's not over, but I'm going to use my story to help other guys figure out that, you know, as much of a badass as you want to be, or as you are, you can still get knocked over. And that's exactly what happened to me. So I think a lot of it, I know I'm just kind of going off on 20 different directions here, but the awareness portion of it for me was where I started to recognize that, hey, you know what, it's okay to say you're not okay. And I love saying that statement, because so many guys, I mean, especially cops, are like, nope, I'm good. You know, pounding their chest, you know, the Kevlar, the whole 9 yards. Dude, no, you're not. This is, I mean, this quote that I say is, you know, you can't go 18 or 19 years or even 5 years, I don't care how long it is, see the things that shake people to their very foundations and expect to be okay, because you're not. Okay. But you will be, as long as you recognize these things and you take the proper steps to heal yourself. Now, for me, it was the shrink thing. It was doing a lot of public speaking. It was writing the book. But aside from all that, on the personal side, it was doing a lot of hiking, doing a lot of motorcycle riding, you know, all these other kind of outside activities to just get as far away from the law enforcement community as I could. So basically, so.
That's great. You know, I'm kind of speechless.
I know it's a lot of information to absorb, and believe me when I tell you, I feel like I speak faster than I need to, because I want everybody to know everything that I know, which is not very much. But at the same time, it's like, man, there's so much to know that I didn't know going through. And, you know, fortunately I had a support team, mostly on the professional side. The personal side, not as much. Now I do, but back in those days I didn't. It was pretty much just me on my own. So now recognizing the failures that I had of not trying to fix myself when I should have, was a big problem. So that's why in my 18th year, it all just kind of collapsed. In fact, it was after I retired 2 years after David was killed. When I retired, that's when I recognized the fact that the day Dave was killed was the day that I checked out from law enforcement, and I just didn't know it. I was so screwed up. So
That's an emotional thing to go through, and it's completely understandable to check out at that time.
yeah, you know, and I mean, I wish I had recognized that earlier, because I mean, there's so many guys that are going through the exact same thing that, again, don't recognize it, or, you know, like we do, you know, nope, I'm good. Dude, no, you're not. No, man, I'm fine. No, you're not, man. And how do you get to these guys? I mean, if they don't want to talk, there's only so much you can do, but they need to recognize that, you know, sometimes it's okay to just to break down and say, you know what, I do need help, you know, because you do, and that's okay.
Well, how many times do you see with mental illness and suicides when the strongest, most outgoing person that you imagine is now all of a sudden in a suicide situation?
I think my girlfriend just told me we're up to 31 just this year alone. Dude, that's absolutely unacceptable. I mean, these guys, you know, I mean, they're all rock stars, you know. And when I go to the academy sometimes, when I talk to the kids, I said, man, you guys are in a privileged position just to be in these chairs, you know, and the kind of things that you're going to do are phenomenal, life altering, so many different ways. But you need to take care of yourself, because, you know, what we do is extremely honorable, no matter what the media, the public, and all the super, you know, the NBA stars, all these kinds of people are talking about us, you know, in a bad way. Not all of them, don't get me wrong, but, you know, a lot of people don't recognize the sacrifices that we make, and including ourselves. And sometimes, very oftentimes, you need to recognize that, hey, man, you know what, it's okay for me to take some time for myself. You know what I mean? Because there's so much help out there, especially nowadays, and it just, it just drives me crazy when I hear guys that I love that they're taking their own lives. And I'm privy to that as well. I mean, I've known a couple of guys from Phoenix that did the same thing, and it's like, oh my God, I just wish that they had reached out to me and recognized that they weren't alone, because you're not alone. There's a ton of support out there, whatever that happens to be, so.
No, it's also, it's a part on us too, to recognize what these people are going through and say to them sometimes, listen, I'm here for you. If you need that support, do not hesitate to ask.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, man. Yeah. And of course, getting into the supervisory role as well, which I never was. The bosses need to recognize that as well. And Phoenix was actually really good about that for the most part. But there are those times when you've got, you're running a squad of 12 or 15 guys. You can't pick up on all the stuff all the time, and that makes perfect sense. I get it, but it's a tough role no matter what you do. So.
No, absolutely. So now you're an instructor at the Marine Corps Police Academy?
Well, yes and no. I was, and then they decided to shut down and move to Missouri, which is a whole nother long story. So
what?
I know, right? It's some crazy stuff. I was actually under contract with them for 3 years. I worked there for about a year and a half, and then they folded up their tents and said, "Oh, we're gonna make more money out there, so we're gonna join up with the Army." Which I can't fault those guys for that. I mean, that's what they're there for, to make money, right? So. Yeah. I just kind of felt like, well, I'm kind of giving them a disservice, because all of the instructors that I worked with were highly experienced guys, and they're losing a ton of experience and then taking on some new guys that maybe or maybe not have that same level of experience. But the truth be told, it sounds kind of really bad to say it this way, but more people want to go to San Diego found so far. So I think that they're probably losing folks, because who wants to spend 4 months in 4 feet of snow versus spend 4 months sitting on the beach. Who knows? Yeah. So that was pretty much the end of that situation. Even though I got hired on before I moved out here to San Diego, when that thing kind of fell apart, I started doing some heavy soul searching, and decided that even though I've already done my 20 years, I'm probably, as long as somebody's willing to take me back, I'm probably going to go back into the law enforcement community, either as an officer or a sheriff or something else like that. So
come to the NYPD and be a civilian speaker to the police academy.
Man, I wish, yeah. In fact, I do a lot of public speaking, and that's really good for me, because a lot of guys, they hear the stuff that I talk about, and I got a PowerPoint also at the whole 9 yards, and I talk about survival and surviving your career, like you already mentioned, mentally, physically, and emotionally, before, during, and after, and having all those factors in your corner or in your toolbox is pretty much how, in my opinion, how a lot of guys are going to make it through a long career, or a gunfight, because I do talk a lot about the gunfights as well, so.
Walk through, if you don't mind, one of those gunfights that you've been in, one of those shootouts.
Well, let's see. Technically, I've been in 3 shootings, 1 gunfight, and so I'll give you the Reader's Digest on the first ones. First one I had like 2 years on. The guy was a convicted felon, wanted on 3 other felonies. He's in a stolen car. He crashes his car under the trailer of a semi, and somehow gets out of the car. The car was literally under the trailer of the rig, and he was still able to get out of the car. How he did that, who only knows. The car was stolen. I ended up answering up for the call, of course, because I'm right there, because I don't think I told you this already, but I was a major ship magnet, of course, in all the precincts that I worked. So I was pretty much right there when the call came out, and found my way through the neighborhood, ended up tracking the guy down. He was inside of another car, trying to steal another car with an 8-inch straight slotted throwing knife. And at the time, he was smashing out the column on his car, trying to steal it. It was an older Cadillac. And it was one of those situations where, I'm young, hair on fire. I didn't really know anything at the time. And so I tell where I'm at, but when I left my patrol car, I ran between a couple of buildings, and now I'm in the back of the building. Nobody knows where the hell I'm at, including myself. except the air unit luckily happened to be overhead and they're watching me. And long story short on this portion, the guy ended up pulling a gun. He's sitting in the front seat of the car. I kicked out the window of the car and he pulled the gun and got to about here. And I fired, 2 rounds, and 1 round went to the door of the car and 1 in the side of his arm. And he was pretty much done. And I joke about it because I've been a firearms instructor since '05, and all these things that they teach you, smooth trigger press and front sight and all these great things, it's all great. But when it actually happens, it was more like, kind of almost panic fire, So that was, technically that was my second one. And then the third one ended up being a rifle shooting out in the middle of nowhere, out in the farm fields, metro area, basically. The guy was ramming semis and cars off the road, the whole 9 yards, really bad. And there were actually 5 shooters on that one. And as he's coming down the road, he's in a flatbed F550 pickup, basically. And as he's coming down the road, my partner and I, he had a rifle too. And as the guy's driving by, he unloaded 7 rounds. I unloaded 9 into the guy's door of his truck, which pretty much stopped him. I think they ended up counting something like 20 separate accidents that this guy created from this truck, including 3 semis that he ran off the road and head on with a marked patrol car as well. So that was pretty ugly. And then of course with Dave, the actual gunfight, because it sounds really stupid to say it this way, but I never understood the difference between a shooting and a gunfight until it happened, which you would think is pretty obvious, right? I mean, okay, dumbass, what do you think it's going to be? Well, you don't think about these things. And with Dave's situation, I came up and I get out of my car and I'm walking down the street, I'm fat, dumb, and happy, and I come up for that first volley of rounds. And the first mistake that I made was after I fired that first volley, I came off target and I dropped the muzzle of my barrel, and the guy started shooting back at me. And it was like, oh shit factor of, oh, wait a second, the guy's not dead. So, you've got that 0.01 of a second to make a decision on what you do. Do you try that again, or do you move someplace else? So I ended up moving off the X, if you will, came back up for that second volley of rounds. And then it was that same thing where, I'm shooting low as I'm coming up, because it's that panic fire of, oh shit, bang, 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 bang. And I finally was able to get my muzzle up to where I needed to get it and put the guy down. It wasn't just me. There were a total of 6 shooters on that one as well. So, so there were a couple of major issues that I had with that particular thing. Of course, losing Dave was obviously 1 through 10 of the worst of the worst. But again, when you carry the biggest gun you're allowed to carry on patrol, basically, is what it was. And you put that many rounds into a bad guy and he's still able to shoot back at you. That's something went horribly wrong there, And it wasn't because I was shooting bad shots. I mean, I was pretty well accurate with my shots, but he was sitting inside of a van and I didn't know where he was inside the van. So it was kind of, well, I got to basically track where I think he is, and that whole thing, the 22 rounds total that I fired was in about 4.5 seconds, and that's including moving from one point to another. So, pretty scary, actually. I mean, I'm not going to lie. When those rounds missed my head by centimeters, it was that fight or flight thing. I was like, oh shit, now what do I do? Do I stand here and, wait for him to kill me, or do I do something else? And even though, thank God, time's over, of course, you can never plan for any specific scenario, because no gunfight's ever going to be the same as, what you've heard over here, or what you've seen over there, or what you've already been involved with, myself included. So this one was completely unique, just like they always are. And so I was able to, believe me when I tell you, it was no conscious thinking whatsoever. It was straight back to the automatic training, like, oh shit, we better do something because we're going to die. And was able to successfully, I don't think I put him down. I think the other guys did. I basically just finished him off. So, but again, in a nutshell, that's pretty much it. So.
Those are 3 incredible stories, and you definitely went through a lot of emotional, physical, stress during those times. And thank God you're still here today for your kids.
Yeah, thanks. The aftermath was, I mean, the shooting portions, the first one, I mean, the guys have been on the range, they understand what I'm going to kind of joke about. When the target turns, raise and fire 2 rounds. Well, that's exactly what happened on the first one, and the guy went down. Second one, it was 9 rounds with the rifle. Okay. And now, so this is my escalation of shootings. It's, small, then bigger, and then bigger, all the way to the top pretty much. So, but the range of emotions after were where it really kind of started to take its toll, if you will, because having to go back and do the walkthroughs and seeing the crime scene photos and going to in Dave's case, going to the hospital and everybody's falling down crying and oh my God, why, and then having to do all the interviews. And I just wrote a story on it. I ended up with my other 5 buddies. We all got awarded the Medal of Valor, for that thing. And I'm like, it's a huge honor, don't get me wrong, but at the same time, it's like, wait a second, Dave died on our watch and now we're getting awarded for it. It's almost, it's not insulting by any means, but it's a very confusing emotion to deal with. It's like, wait a second, why am I getting recognized for valor when somebody was killed? It's tough. I mean, it really is. So.
No, that's you're so right. You're so right. It's definitely a confusing situation with that. But listen, Chris, you've had an incredible career. It really sounds like an incredible career. And thank you for everything that you've done. Truly,
Yeah.
thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, man. Appreciate it.
Thank you. So let me ask you something. Would you, based on your career, your specific career, would you do it all again?
Absolutely, 100%, no questions asked. Would I change some things? Of course. The bad thing that that I didn't even recognize until years and years later. I started doing some more research on other agencies across the country. In fact, the San Diego Sheriff's Office, I just looked them up the other day. They started their agency in 1850. They've lost 9 officers in their whole time. Okay. And I think only, if I'm not mistaken, only 4 of the, not only by any stretch, but 4 of those were to gunfire and the others were accidents or stuff like that. In my time on with Phoenix, we lost 16 in the line of duty in 18 years. And after I retired, we've lost 2 since. And most of those were violent attacks, a few accidents, drowning, stuff like this, single vehicle accidents, stuff like that. But most of them were violent attacks. And I'm not even talking about the ones that actually survived, because rewind slightly. The reason I was off for 7 weeks was because there were 6 officer-involved shootings, well, within the time frame that I got in mind. 4 out of those 6 were ambushes, and 3 officers were shot, including Dave. And that, I mean, that's incredible. I mean, 6 officer-involved shootings in a 6-week period, 7-week period, where it was, it's unbelievable. So, so going back on those things, yeah, I wish, knowing what I know now, I could change a few things to where a little bit more awareness, a little bit more training, more funding, so we got more guys out there on the street to help protect us, these kinds of things, which I don't have much say so in, because I was never on that side of the fence anyways. But you can't argue when you lost 16 in the line of duty. We need to do something to up the game a little bit more, so.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. So because this is the Heroes First podcast, sponsored by Fund the First, and if you've taken a look at Fund the First, we're the nation's leading verified crowdfunding platform for first responders, military and medical professionals, and we actually allow for departments to raise money for funding, which is great. We can verify the department and all that kind of stuff, which is pretty incredible. So being that this is the Heroes First podcast, I'd like to ask two simple questions before we end the show, because we are running out of time. Number one, and let's actually use this because of your experiences on the job. If you were to have a superpower, what would it be?
A superpower? Oh my goodness. Wow. I would say, oh my God, that's a great question. I haven't had that one asked before. I'm going to have to say awareness, making everybody aware of what they're facing on every conceivable level. You know what I mean? If that makes any sense. So, survival, fitness, not only that, but when you retire, because when I retired, I lost my identity, of course, because now I can't chase bad guys anymore and nobody cares. I'm not in uniform. And then the financial portion of that as well. It's like setting yourself up for success when you retire, and sharing some of your stuff, not everything, with your family, because they know what you're going through, whether you tell them or not. And I think that so many first responders end up getting divorced because they're trying to hide everything that they're going through. And that's a huge mistake. I mean, I knew that I was in trouble when I walked in the door, when I didn't share my stuff. And it's like, why aren't you telling me what's going on? Well, I don't think I'm trying to protect you. Well, you're not protecting me from shit. All you're doing is making it worse. And I think that's a huge problem for our community. So
that's such a humble answer.
Yeah.
Seriously, that's such a humble thing. When you ask somebody what their superpower is going to be, they're going to say laser vision, flight, teleportation. Right. And you said awareness. That's incredible. It says a lot about your character. Thank you. That was really, that's an incredible answer. And I hope our listeners take something away from that. That was really incredible to say that.
Thanks.
Incredible. So the last question I'm going to have for you. What does a hero mean to you?
Okay, I'm gonna use this opportunity to give a plug to my girlfriend. She's a hero. What she does is an organization called Nothing But Love Notes, and it's exactly what it sounds like. She literally writes notes and hands them out to first responders, military, stuff like that. And very, very, very oftentimes I'll be with her and we'll hand a note to a veteran or something like that, and they are just talking it up and crying and the whole 9 yards, and we're all hugging it out, and it's unbelievable. Especially the Vietnam vets, because as we all know, those guys, they got a really bad rap coming back, and they've been suppressing these feelings for like 50 some odd years, right? So when they get a note that says, thank you for your service and we appreciate you, we love you, all these kinds of things, it's huge. And so she's my hero as far as what she does with that, and along with some other things as well too. But I will tell you that, I guarantee that anybody watching your show that's on the first responder side of things will say every single time, trust me, I'm not a hero. I'm just a regular guy that's just out there taking care of business, even the military guys. I mean, I know a lot of them like we do, so we don't consider ourselves heroes by any stretch. But, the people that are supporting us, those are the heroes in my eyes. So
perfect answer. Absolutely perfect answer. Well, thank you everyone for listening to episode 10 of the Heroes First podcast with our incredible guest, Chris Hoyer. Chris, it was a pleasure to have you on the show, and we'll see you all next time.
Thank you. It was an honor. Thank you.
You've been listening to the Heroes First podcast with Robert Garland. We hope you've gotten some useful and practical information from the show. Make sure to like, rate, share, and review. We'll be back soon, but in the meantime, make sure to visit fundthefirst.com and follow us on social media at fundthefirst. See you next time.